Okay, welcome. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, well, my name is Reed Pollock, and I am the secretary of Lux Study Center in Calgary. I've been a member of the ATCTA in Canada and the Theosophical Society for about 6 years now. I started at Veritas Study Center here with Lorraine Christensen. And shortly, about a year or two after that, there was need for another group. So we founded Lux because the numbers were getting pretty high. So we have a good 7 people that meet every 2 weeks. We do it on Zoom. If anybody would like to join our Zoom meetings, we're more than happy to accommodate you. I've also been the editor of the Light Bearer for 4 years now, almost 5. And so any of you who might have received that, I've been the editor for a while. And generally, I've given a few speeches on theosophical matters and a few talks. And I'm excited today to talk about Krishnamurti, who is a very interesting character within the theosophical world and the overall spiritual philosophy world of speakers, orators, and writers. He's definitely a very high-profile figure that basically lived between, as you can see on the screen, May 11th, 1885 to February 17, 1986. We will begin now. So Krishnamurti, we're going to look at his life, his philosophy, and his relationship to the Theosophical Society. Okay, next slide, please, Robert. Okay, Krishnamurti was a very prominent figure in the New Age movement of the 20th century and the spiritual philosophical movement. His legacy, continues well into the 21st century. His life and work were also inextricably linked with the Theosophical Society, which, we will discuss that at length today. So the topics we'll go through, we're going to go through who was Krishnamurti, what was the relationship with the Theosophical Society. And then we'll get into his beliefs and, a bit of a timeline and a summary of his work and teachings. Next slide, please. Okay, so there will be roughly about 13 slides, and then afterwards, you guys, please, I'll try and answer any questions, or we can have a bit of a discussion and see what you guys thought about Krishnamurti. Okay, so who was Jiddu Krishnamurti? Jiddu Krishnamurti was born on May 11th, 1895 in southern India in what is now known as Madanapal. He was born into a Brahmin caste. He was one of 11 children. Out of these 11, only 6 survived childhood. His father was a prominent longtime theosophist, and when he retired, he found work kind of as a groundskeeper on the Theosophical Society's headquarters in Adyar. So he, of course, moved his entire family to the property, which is where a young Krishnamurti first came in contact with, the Theosophical Society after his father's probably teachings in the home. Krishnamurti's mother passed away quite young. It was a pretty traumatizing event in his life, and this kind of shaped him, allowed him to become, or not allowed him, but definitely enabled him to become a lot closer to Annie Besant, who at the time was the president of the Theosophical Society. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Theosophical Society in 1909. In 1909, in Adyar, India, the Theosophical Society was probably just coming into its real apex as an organization in India. Blavatsky had died in 1891. And at this point in 1909, after Olcott was president, Annie Besant had become the president of the Theosophical Society in 1909. So she was the international president. Besant, she had developed a close writing and working relationship with Charles W. Leadbeater, and he claimed clairvoyance. He becomes a very prominent figure at this point in Theosophical writing and in the story of Krishnamurti. This relationship with Leadbeater and Besant would continue on for quite a few years. India itself was in a great shift. It was, the country was in the process of kind of throwing off the chains of colonialism. And Besant was also heavily involved in this. And the TS was, or the Theosophical Society was shifting as well. Besant and Leadbeater, as we'll see a little bit later, are controversial figures in the TS because the teachings were kind of changing. They were kind of going in a different direction that we'll discuss a little bit later. Next slide, please. Okay, so on the left, obviously, is Annie Besant, and on the right is Charles Leadbeater. Annie Besant and Leadbeater are both very prominent but controversial figures within the Theosophical Society, within the history and within the organization. We could all do a whole series on either one of them. Their work was so profound. There was a lot of it. Annie Besant is a very powerful figure in the TS. She was international president, and she became president in 1907. She was a very powerful woman. She had deep political beliefs, a very strong writer, very strong orator. Much of her younger life was, dedicated to socialism. She was deeply involved in women's rights, early Marxist theory, the Fabian Society of England. She was also involved politically with Irish independence at the time, and also became a very prominent figure in Indian independence in India. She became very close with the really powerful Gandhi family that is still quite powerful today. There's streets named after her. She was quite a woman. But at her core, Annie Besant was a political operator and an activist. And while she kind of moved away from the overt politics once she met Madame Blavatsky in Paris and then subsequently moved to India to work with her, she still kept a lot of those, well, definitely the skill set and a lot of that direction to be kind of an activist and make things happen. She was a force. She met Charles Leadbeater in 1894 in London and became very close with him. Leadbeater was originally an Anglican priest, and he'd split with the church over his passion for spiritualism, which led him into contact with Besant in London, and they kind of formed a very strong partnership for writing and ideas. They wrote quite a few books together. Famous titles were Occult Chemistry, and there was another book on thought forms that are, very prominent and staples of the Theosophical worldview. But Leadbeater also kind of claimed clairvoyance, and he also allegedly helped Besant become clairvoyant. And this didn't always sit very well with everybody in the Theosophical Society. So there was kind of a new direction. Leadbeater alone wrote over 60 books, Besant around 300 pieces of published writing between books and articles and speeches. The controversy with Besant and Leadbeater really began with the beginning of the era of Krishnamurti. Besant and Leadbeater were almost accused of trying to Christianize the Theosophical Society, and that their brand of theosophy was kind of straying from Blavatsky's teachings. You know, like any big organization, you're always going to have rifts and you know, factions emerging, and this was still true. This is very true of what happened in India at the time. In the end, some people call, you know, the Besant Leadbeater stuff, like the fundamental Blavatsky people look at it as pseudo theosophy. However, you know, the volume of their work cannot be denied. They did do an incredible job. They wrote a lot of text. Leadbeater, on a darker note, there have been allegations, you know, of, you know, possible sex crimes with young males. He was expelled from the Theosophical Society at one point, but he was brought back to Adyar by Besant when he became president, or when she became president. So these allegations have kind of always hung over Leadbeater, and they've always kind of hung over the Krishnamurti thing, even though there isn't a lot of information. And I'm not going to go too deep into it because I don't know. And we will discuss other aspects of the relationship. But these allegations are out there. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide you can see on the right is 6-year-old Krishnamurti. Up in the middle picture is Leadbeater and Krishnamurti when Krishnamurti was a teen, and then on the far right, is Annie Besant. To her right is Krishnamurti. To her left is Krishnamurti's younger brother Nitya, and this photo was taken in London, England, when she brought Krishnamurti to the UK. I will discuss this a little further down the road here. So the title there is The Discovery of the Maitreya. Now, one day, Leadbeater saw Krishnamurti walking along a beach with his brother on the Theosophical Society's property in Adyar. Leadbeater, claiming clairvoyance, believed that he saw a great aura coming from Krishnamurti, who was only 14 at the time. And he thought that this was a powerful sign that Krishnamurti was potentially the Maitreya, or a suitable candidate to be the vehicle of the Maitreya or the world teacher. He gave, eventually, they were brought in for training and education, and they started this idea of the Maitreya or the world teacher, which is a Buddhist concept that we'll explore in the next slide. He gave him at the time the pseudonym Alcyone, and oversaw the writing of the first book by Krishnamurti under the Alcyone title, which was At the Feet of the Master, which is a fantastic book. And other things, you know, Leadbeater was claiming that he could see Krishnamurti's like 30 past lives, and that 11 of Krishnamurti's past lives was a female, and you know, it started to really develop. But there was no doubt that Krishnamurti had something very special with him, and Leadbeater oversaw his education in Adyar until about 1915. Next slide, please. Okay, the Maitreya Buddha, the world teacher. Okay, this is a very important concept in the story of the Theosophical Society and Krishnamurti. So the Maitreya Buddha is what is known as the future Buddha. It's the coming Buddha, also known as the world teacher. This is a second or third century bust on the right of a depiction of the Maitreya. This is a very common and powerful narrative within Mahayana main vehicle Buddhism, that the next Buddha is on his way, and that they will be the world teacher that unites all of mankind. Many cults within Buddhism and within Hinduism, there's been many sects and cults about the Maitreya throughout history. It is kind of a messianic theology, similar in fact to, the second coming of Christ, how the Jews are awaiting their Messiah, and how Hindus kind of wait for Krishna. He was, this belief that Krishnamurti was essentially the world teacher triggered a lot of training and that of Krishnamurti, and they believed that they could almost bring forth his spiritual development and rapidly push him along into a bodhisattva and then to become the world Buddha. This was, very interesting concept, and it didn't always sit so well, I think, with other members of the Theosophical Society, because it was a very Besant and Leadbeater focused endeavor. Some people thought that it was too much involved with Christian theology as opposed to Buddhist theology. But they were going to run with it, and Krishnamurti took to the teachings quite well. Next slide, please. So the Order of the Star in the East. This was an organization based in Adyar within the Theosophical Society, founded by Annie Besant and Leadbeater, to be the organization within the society that prepared the world for Krishnamurti as the world teacher in 1911. Krishnamurti was made the head of this organization, and his brother, who he was extremely close to, was made the secretary. At this time, Annie Besant had taken legal guardianship of Krishnamurti and his brother. So they were fully enmeshed in the world and in this Order of the Star in the East. So after the education and the Order of the Star in the East, this order saw Krishnamurti and his brother traveling with Besant to England to be trained in English. He took to English very well. He was giving speeches. It was kind of like building momentum. It was interesting because when you read about the Order of the Star of the East, you can really see Besant's activism and her organization skills and all of this, creating the momentum. It was a full-blown organization, and it stretched from India all through Europe and even into the United States. Next slide, please. Okay, so Krishnamurti, essay alone. Krishnamurti, this is him and his brother on the left. During this period, he was writing a lot. That first book came out when he was allegedly 14 at the feet of the master. The guardianship, as I said, Annie Besant had legal guardianship of Krishnamurti and his brother. This eventually did lead to a lot of conflicts between Besant and Krishnamurti's father, who wanted to rescind the order that he'd given guardianship over. I'm not sure what happened there, but I don't think he was successful. I think Krishnamurti remained within legal guardianship to Besant, and he was also very, very close to Besant. As I mentioned before, his mother passed when he was quite young, and I think Annie Besant really fulfilled that role for him. His education, Krishna and Nitya received an incredible, great education on the grounds of the Theosophical Society and in London. English, languages, occult sciences, modern sciences. It was quite an amazing program he was put through, but he was quite young when he went through it. London, Krishnamurti and Nitya were taken to London to learn English, and they did conduct lectures there in 1911. And all of this, of course, was to promote the Order of the Star in the East and the world teacher coming of the Maitreya program. The interesting thing, or maybe, a little little dubious thing was that the entire image of Krishnamurti and all of this, you know, it was designed by Besant and Leadbeater. It was a pretty carefully crafted program. But, you know, it was working. Like, they were gaining membership. People were really starting to clue into Krishnamurti's skills as an orator and as a philosopher, and the movement was growing. Next slide, please. So Krishnamurti in 1922, Leadbeater was in Sydney and at this point, and he'd gone to Sydney with his brother, and then he traveled from Sydney to Ojai, California. And he had quite a following at this time. He was a young man, and he became quite ill in Ojai. And during this illness, he experienced what he called a spiritual awakening. He fell into a sort of trance, and he felt a deep mystical union with the universe, and he was really profoundly changed coming out of it. And at this point, also Krishnamurti's people purchased him a cottage in Ojai, California, which is in the southern part of California, outside of Ventura, California. And this was important because now, you know, Krishnamurti had kind of his own home base outside of Theosophical Society headquarters. Next slide, please. Okay, so during this time in Ojai and during the spiritual awakening, Krishnamurti had kind of started to rebel a bit against the idea of being the world teacher and being the Maitreya, and was kind of pushing back against Besant and Leadbeater and their teachings. He decided after the spiritual awakening that he was going to break with the TS, and he was going to renounce the world teacher and his role as the head of the Order of the Star in the East. So at a very large meeting on August 3rd in 1929 in Amman, Netherlands, Krishnamurti made the break, and he made the break with the TS publicly. It was at this speech in the Netherlands where his famous concept of the pathless land was the center. It was the center of his speech, which was subsequently the center of his resignation. And I will read you a little bit of that speech, because this concept that he came up with of the pathless land really informed his philosophy going forward throughout history. I maintain that truth is a pathless land, and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. That is my point of view, and I adhere to that absolutely and unconditionally. Truth, being limitless, unconditioned, unapproachable by any path whatsoever, cannot be organized, nor should any organization be formed to lead or coerce people along a particular path. This is no magnificent deed, because I do not want followers, and I mean this. The moment you follow someone, you cease to follow truth. I'm not concerned whether you pay attention to what I say or not. I want to do certain things in the world, and I am going to do it with unwavering concentration. I am concerning myself with only one essential thing: to set man free. I desire to free him from all cages, from all fears, and not to found religions, new sects, or to establish new theories and new philosophies. So this was his resignation letter to the Theosophical Society. And that was it. The Order of the Star collapsed, and he moved on. He moved to Ojai. Next slide, please. So Krishnamurti headed to Ojai. He had his cottage there, and the Krishnamurti Foundation was set up with his followers, and he started a new phase of his life. Now, Ojai, California, I'm sure many of you know, that it is a very mystical and occult place. The Theosophical Society had their, still has an institute and a headquarters there, the Crotona Institute. Many sects and members of the New Age movement have meditation centers, meeting halls. Ojai is the Ojai Valley is quite mystical. To this day, it's part of the lineage of the California ideology and the type of thinking that has come out of the 60s, 70s. Ojai was really the southern capital of all that California New Age movement. So here, you know, he moved to Ojai. He started the next phase of his work. He lived, he wrote, and he spoke a lot from his home in Ojai. He wrote 9 books in his life. He gave countless talks, countless speeches. And the thing about Krishnamurti was he had an incredible charisma. There was like a distance in his language and a distance from the talks that was really unique. But it all was delivered in a knowing voice. He commanded respect, you know, but Krishnamurti, based off of the Pathless Land and many other things, you know, he really was an anti-guru. Many people looked to him as a spiritual leader, but he turned his back on all of that, and he became essentially an anti-guru. And he was, you know, he brought a bit of discipline to an era like in the 60s and whatnot, of a lot of fake gurus and a lot of pageantry, and he was the real thing. It was a time of cults and, you know, drugs and hedonism, and he kept a straight path, and people really respected him for that. Next slide, please. You know, and it was during this time that Krishnamurti, he really became like a truly global figure. He wouldn't call himself a philosopher, but he definitely, you know, he had a philosophy that we will, you know, kind of get into in a little bit. But at the time, a lot of it was, you know, timing. Like, he was in the right place at the right time. He was in California in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There was a lot of crossover with many other thinkers and celebrities and artists at the time. You know, famous crossovers with Krishnamurti were the philosopher Alan Watts. They had an open dialogue. Scientist David Bohm. There was a lot of great work in discussion between them. He was also a heavy influence on a lot of writers and artists. You know, Jackson Pollock was quite influenced by the teachings and writings of Krishnamurti. So was Eckhart Tolle. Aldous Huxley as well, another character from Europe who ended up in California around the time, was very influenced by Krishnamurti. And Krishnamurti is also engaged in many religious and theological discussions, you know, with many prominent Hindu and Buddhist scholars, including, you know, the Dalai Lama. The picture I have up is Krishnamurti and Bruce Lee. I found this one to be kind of an interesting story. Bruce Lee at the time was very badly injured, and he was basically in traction and he couldn't move. So he could really do nothing but lay there and read. And he, you know, he became very deeply interested in Krishnamurti and Krishnamurti's philosophy. And you can kind of see with Bruce Lee, because Bruce Lee was not just an actor and he was not just a martial arts guy. He was a bit of a philosopher himself. And he developed a martial arts philosophy as well. And he brought a little bit of Krishnamurti's thinking into it. So where Krishnamurti has the pathless land, you know, Bruce Lee has the famous quote and philosophy attached to him: be like water, you know, be formless, be shapeless, you know, adaptable, take what you need, discard what you don't. You know, this definitely has Taoist origins, but there's also a lot of echoes of Krishnamurti's pathless land in Bruce Lee's philosophies, which I found quite fascinating. Next slide, please. So, well, I've talked a lot about his history and the relationship with the Theosophical Society, but like, what did Krishnamurti believe? That, if he came out of the Theosophical Society but broke with it, what are the man's beliefs, and are they reconcilable with Theosophy? So Krishnamurti, he really has to be listened to or read to understand his delivery and his style. It's very unique. However, he has explored a lot of topics such as psychological revolution, the power of meditation in your personal life and on the world, how human interaction manifests itself, and the positives and benefits of our personal behavior. Relationships, human relationships were a big topic for him. And he was very adamant that the transformation of society or of the world will not be done through a revolution that's a political revolution, a social, or even a religious revolution. He believed that the transformation of society will be done through a revolution of the mind. And, his constant self-assessment, meditation, debate, challenging your ideas. This was what he believed the path to a better society, and to use one of our terms, probably enlightenment. So his philosophy, was definitely steeped in Theosophy. Like, he was trained in it in the early days, but towards the end, his philosophy differed a lot from what we would think of as Theosophical doctrine. I have this article from Blavatsky, Theosophy from the UK, where they were kind of summarizing what Krishnamurti believed, and if it was, and they didn't think that his ideas were not in harmony with Theosophy. So it's interesting to see where he started and what his belief system was towards the end of his life. I'll quickly read this summary. So these are the things that Krishnamurti believed. Number one, Krishnamurti, and we'll see the difference between Theosophical thinking and Krishnamurti's philosophy. So number one, Krishnamurti says there is no divine or absolute. Krishnamurti says there is no Atman or higher self. Krishnamurti says there is no soul. Krishnamurti says that reincarnation is an invented theory produced by fear, and that there is no reincarnation other than in the sense of being born into life again each day when we wake up. Krishnamurti says that cause and effect do not exist, but not in the sense of the law of karma, which he calls an invention. He believes that the masters were only projections of our human belief, that they were more of a thought form, maybe. Krishnamurti also says that the bodhisattva ideal is an irrelevant invention, that, maybe this ties into the fact that they thought he was going to become the bodhisattva and he was turning against that. Krishnamurti says that to reach truth, there is no path to follow and no self-discipline or self-mastery to be applied. Krishnamurti says that thought and thinking are something fundamentally detrimental to human beings, and that the mind is produced by the brain. Krishnamurti dismisses all ancient spiritual teachers, philosophers, and scriptures of both East and West, and says that only fearful people read books and study philosophies and/or esotericism. Krishnamurti says that death is a deep, mysterious, and creative process, but criticizes people who want to know what happens after death. Krishnamurti says that love and compassion, felt equally for everyone, is the most important thing. So with these, you see the break. You see that he is, no longer, holding true to a lot of Theosophical doctrine. But you also see in there that there still is at the core a very similar belief in love and compassion, a belief in in self-mastery, self-discipline, knowing yourself. His later philosophy definitely was of the time. You know, he was breaking with the old kind of pageantry and you know, the complicated, complex language that definitely comes with studying theosophical works. But myself, I can still see a lot of the Theosophical Society in him. And even in his schools, he started 3 schools, and the tenets of the schools are very similar for educating young people in the Krishnamurti tradition. They're very similar to the 3 objectives of the Theosophical Society. You know, for his schools, he has a global outlook, you know, the vision of a whole as a distinct from the part. There should never be a sectarian outlook. You know, this is universal brotherhood, concern for the man environment, humanity is part of nature. You know, if nature is not cared for, it will boomerang on man, which I think we're going through right now. And that the right education and deep affection is important. And that religious spirit, you know, which includes the scientific temper, the religious mind is alone, not lonely. It is in communion with people and nature. You know, this is moving forward with the brotherhood of man and keeping human advancement at the forefront as well. So, I mean, as much as people want to believe in the break between the two, there is still a symbiotic relationship between Krishnamurti and the Theosophical Society philosophically. Next slide, please. Okay, so despite what I just read you about his break and the long kind of complicated history, you know, why should Theosophists study Krishnamurti? Well, you know, he's part of our history. There's many extremely valuable pieces of philosophy in Krishnamurti's work. He does, for people who are maybe looking for something a little more direct, a little more immediate, you know, he does dispense with a lot of the dogma, pageantry, highbrow terminology. He's very direct. He's very human. His language is sharp. There's no pulling any punches with Krishnamurti, and a lot of people really enjoy that and really appreciate that. He almost, you know, and I don't like to use this term, but like, he almost has a bit of he was the precursor of the tough love, self-help kind of speaking and orating that is so prevalent now. He was trained, you know, in the TS teachings, and it's interesting to see, you know, how they've manifested. But in a very interesting note that I also read in my research was they asked Krishnamurti in 1934 in New Zealand, you know, after he'd kind of split with the TS, you know, well, what did you think of Blavatsky's teachings? He claimed that he didn't really study them, that most of the work that he was trained in the TS was actually the work of Besant and Leadbeater. So there is that break there, that he may not have, you know, fully even been educated in the Secret Doctrine or the Isis Unveiled, just kind of like the versioning and the distilling of those texts through Leadbeater and Besant, which I thought was an interesting twist in the story. Yeah, he doesn't like, you know, dogma. He doesn't like organized religion. I think it's a personal, you know, I mean, he did go through a lot as a young man with organizations and it really informed his pathless land. So in many ways, you know, Theosophy and Krishnamurti's philosophy, you know, they do differ greatly, but they are very sympathetic. He came out of the Theosophical world, and I also really believe, I believe that one of the most important things with both Theosophy and Krishnamurti is this idea that you have to learn. You have to move between different ideas, philosophies, compare them, see what works for you. Maybe not all the Theosophical thought works for you, and a lot of, you know, Krishnamurti's philosophy might not work for you either. but it's important, to have a balanced take and, to take what you will in your own development. And I think those sympathies for constant inquiry, constant self reevaluation that come out of both the Theosophical Society's teachings and Krishnamurti's philosophies are why we should all study Krishnamurti and compare and contrast. I think he's a very fascinating character. His work is very profound, and I encourage everyone to look into him as well. YouTube is full of speeches, full of them. There's plenty of audiobooks of his talks. His books are available everywhere. He has a very large headquarters in Victoria, outside of Victoria. And then the big Krishnamurti Foundation in Ojai is fantastic. And it was, I don't know what the situation is now, but it was connected to the Crotona Institute, which is literally like physically backed onto the Crotona Institute, which is a Theosophical Institute. Next slide, please. So that's my very brief overview of the Krishnamurti story and his philosophy and his connection to the Theosophical Society. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all for listening. If you want to think about what you just heard and you have any questions, or maybe we can get a bit of a dialogue going. I really enjoyed compiling this, and I hope you guys found some interesting tidbits that will help in your exploration of theosophical concepts, Krishnamurti's work, and just your own personal development into these spiritual matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reid.
Oh, you're welcome, Maurice.
It was very good.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I was talking with my friend last night, and I was telling her that Krishnamurti he's a fascinating character. He really is.
He is.
And and yes, maybe his early life was difficult, and some people would say, yeah, he was definitely exploited, and I think he was. But then you kind of have to ask the question: would he be who he was today without it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of looking back on the history and the life, I guess we can be a bit more objective. I think he definitely had strong feelings toward organized societies and religion and stuff like that because of his experience. But there was no doubt he was a teacher. Maybe he wasn't the world teacher in the Maitreya, but he was something. He was a powerful human being with a purpose on this earth.
Yeah. And
apparently
you couldn't go to any of his talks without being totally engrossed and totally so connected and so energized by what he was saying.
Yeah, Michael Gomes told me he heard Krishnamurti speak in Adyar in the 80s, and he said it was absolutely spellbinding. That he was.
Yeah. And he never really truly personally broke with the society. He was very, very good friend with Radha Bernier, and
absolutely
lots and lots of times at Adyar. Yeah.
Yes. And like Leadbeater and Besant, they died I think in the 1930s. So he had a long time to reconcile it and almost return so I think what's important is the work that came out of it and the knowledge, and I'm very impressed by Krishnamurti. We have members of our group at Lux who are they kind of came to the Theosophical Society through Krishnamurti. It was kind of the other way, right? So it's very, very interesting because I enjoyed the research, so I'm glad. I was happy to give this talk. And what does anyone else? Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
I do. Thanks, Reid. That was I learned a lot from that.
Great.
I was actually in Ojai in October It was
Yeah, I've
awesome.
never been. I hear it's amazing. I hear
Yeah,
it's
I went to Crotona and met Pablo Sender and had a nice
excellent.
meeting with him. And then he says, "Oh, have you been to the Krishnamurti house?" And I said, "No."
Yeah. And
So
so
I
yeah,
went.
you went.
So I went there too, and you can actually sit in his bedroom and meditate. It's all cushions on the floor and it's beautiful and white. And the energy there is just amazing. And there's outside, it's all lemon trees and stuff and orange trees, but that's not really what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
What I hadn't heard before was the degree at which he broke. I didn't know it was that, like, he basically sounds like he just chucked the main tenets of theosophy. And just thinking about how he was, or how we perceive he was corralled and observed for his potentials. It sounds to me like I'm a man now. I don't need mommy and daddy anymore. And you know how kids are, they chuck what their parents, right? They get rid of it in
Yeah, you
order
could
to
look at it that
become
way.
themselves. But then once they're gone, yeah, you see the virtues, and then he's coming back to the society from the thing. Sounds like from what you said. That was just an observation I had as you said that. And there's another aspect to that, because I'm an artist, and I had a friend who went into an artistic apprenticeship, like a formal apprenticeship. And at the end of it, because it lasted for 3 years, he was told, now you kill the master. Meaning you no longer do the art that I do, because you've copied me to learn how I do it. Now you have to go out and become yourself.
You
So
find
I just saw this as a parallel to, you know, the child saying, I don't need mom and dad anymore. I'm going to be me. So anyways, that's what I got from it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that was that's a really great way of looking at his progression and the hard break. And it was, you know, it really was an act of rebellion, the pathless land. And when, you know, he's rebelling against his parents, he was, you know, moving out, he was doing all, yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Yeah. And then also, yeah, you kill the master and you go your own way. And he did. And then in the end, you know, his close relationship with Radha Bernier, he did return to Adyar at the end of his last years. And I don't think he was ever going to do that until you know, the relationship. So there was a coming full circle there, you know, for him.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. That's great.
Maybe I can say that like when they said that Krishnamurti was going to be the next Maitreya, if it, like that created like a lot of
big problems.
But I think if they would have said that Krishnamurti would become a great instructor, I mean, we can all see by now that that was true, because Krishnamurti is known all over the world. I think it's like they crossed the line there. There's a difference between a great instructor and the next Maitreya or the next Christ. So
yes, yeah, and I think you're right. I think that the zealousness of pushing him as a great as the Maitreya or the second coming of a messianic figure, yeah, that caused a lot of problems. And I think it definitely caused a lot of problems. I think it was in Germany, I read, it was the whole Order of the Star in the East thing that kind of led, or was maybe the last straw of Rudolf Steiner splitting into anthroposophy. And, you know, it was, and I mean, and we also forget, you know, the Theosophical Society is a very large organization. There's many people involved at the time, and there were, you know, political winds, and it was a global operation, and these type of things happen. They happen in these big institutions. There are always factions. There are always different eras, different types of thought in different time. And, you know, it was very interesting for me to see the philosophical lineages that went from Blavatsky into Besant into Krishnamurti. You know, it's quite a story. You know, it's quite a story of spiritualism in the world. But I really feel that at its core, you know, both Krishnamurti and the Theosophical Society are asking you to do the same thing, to do personal inquiry and personal research and investigations.
Yeah,
You know?
maybe I can say another thing, or like, I find there's a big paradox because as the Buddha said, I believe, like, I'm not a god, I'm just a regular, I'm just a man who have searched and found certain things. And now you have a statue of the Buddha all over the world.
Yes.
And Krishnamurti is the same thing. He said, I don't want anybody to follow me, but like there is a lot of school of Krishnamurti, and there was thousands of people at his talks and all that. So like there is a paradox there. And the other thing I can say as a similar thing as the Theosophical Society is Krishnamurti say that we are the one, there is no master, and in the Theosophical Society, we say that, like in the Secret Doctrine, we say the same thing, is that we go through karma and reincarnation, and we are the only one who bring our own suffering and our own liberation. It cannot be done by somebody else.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's, yeah, exactly. And I think that's what's great about Krishnamurti is he's kind of living proof of that ideal that you have to self-actualize, you have to do it yourself.
I remember, I'm not sure about that. Somebody told me that, but and I did not. I did not check. Whoops, to make sure, but I believe it's true. I've been told that once he was making a talk, and there was a lot of people there, of course. And then he asked, who is here for the first time? And people raised their hand, and who is here for the second time? And he went like that. And eventually a group of people say, you know, we have been following you. We never miss one of your talks since the beginning. And with a certain sense of pride. And he looked at them and he said, what are you doing here?
Yeah, what's wrong? Yeah, why aren't you figuring it out? Yeah.
You didn't understand the first time, the second time, the third time. What are you doing here?
Yeah, it's not going so well for you, is it? Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, no, I you know, I always enjoyed listening to him talk or debate because it was just his like he spoke with such direct purpose, like it was so sharp and to the point, and he didn't it's, you know, almost a little intimidating sometimes because like I mentioned last night to you, Robert, I almost feel like he's scolding me sometimes when he's speaking, you know. Yeah. But yeah, I like him a lot, and I think he's an important part of he's a very important part of the Theosophical Society's history, and yeah, definitely complex, but whose life history isn't complex, you know?
Yeah.
I think what I've gotten from Krishnamurti from the very beginning, and what a lot of people have gotten from him, is that essentially we are individuals. We choose what we are and what we become.
Yeah.
We may follow a theosophical guideline. We may follow a Krishnamurti as a guideline. We may choose a philosophy of some kind to follow to get us started. But eventually, we are all unique in our search. When he says that there is no path, he's right. Each and every one of us does his own thing, her own thing, and finds their own way to becoming the very best that we can possibly be. And I read recently that, and this was, who was it? I think it was, yeah, Vivekananda. And he said something like, eventually we will have reached fruition, or that goal, that huge goal, when each and every one of us is our own religion, is our own spirituality, when we have finally discovered ourselves, our higher selves. And that's when we will have succeeded. And we
Yeah.
won't need to hang on to a religion anymore, or to anything. We will have found our own truths. And
Yeah.
that eventually that's what we're all aiming for.
No, I agree. I think that that's the most important thing that came out of this talk, and my research as well.
I would like to pass a comment maybe on Leadbeater, because he have been criticized a lot, and we have, like many people have talked about his clairvoyance and criticized. I was listening to a talk by Tim Boyd, and he said something really interesting. He said, you know, clairvoyance is like voyance. It's like physical voyance with your eyes. If you look at something and I look at something, we're not going to describe the same thing. So we cannot expect that clairvoyance would be an exact thing either, because for the same reason, then when you look with your eyes and I look with my eyes, we don't see the same exact thing. It's the same thing with clairvoyance. And there's two things, like when he said that Krishnamurti would be the next Messiah, he was wrong. But if you would, again, if you would have said that Krishnamurti would be one of the greatest instructor, then he would have been right. And if you read a book like Occult Chemistry, it's not possible to have known things like that are now confirmed by science if you don't have like clairvoyance, because like how can you know in the 18 something or 19 something that there is something much more smaller than the atom, much more smaller than the nucleus of the atom, and like Leadbeater and Annie Besant, they knew that already. It's in the book Occult Chemistry.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, Leadbeater, he's a very complex character, and I've read a bit. Like Maurice, you gave me thought forms, and I've also read his Coming of the Sixth Race, and you know, Leadbeater, there's something there. You know, like he's quite a prolific writer. Like, I mean, yeah, maybe as a man he's got some problems, but there was something there too. You know, there was something there too. And
he was a human being. He was a
being,
human being. And the masters wouldn't have written to him if he wasn't worthy of it.
Yeah, and exactly. And he, you know, all of them, you know, like there's a real wild assortment of characters in this whole story, you know, so yeah. And I mean, they're all worth investigating. They're all worth the presentation, you know, it's interesting.
And Leadbeater would, if I may say, Leadbeater would always preface his books by like with a disclaimer, you know, I've seen this, but it doesn't mean it's the truth.
Right.
It's what I'm allowed to know now, and it's being filtered through my personality, sort of thing. So he's, you know, he's giving everybody the benefit of the doubt that he's wrong.
That's right.
I've never heard of these allegations. I mean, I've been reading stuff for 4 years, but I've just joined, but I'd never heard of these sexual allegations and stuff. And it just strikes me as not right, because if he was following the teachings, that, you know, the getting rid of the, you know, the animal lusts and stuff like that is so crucial to being on the path. It just doesn't jive for me anyway.
Well,
I don't know. Like,
whenever you become an important person, you become the target of all
Yeah,
kinds of
yeah,
things.
there
So,
was that
yeah.
part of the story too, that he was definitely targeted by other factions.
Yeah.
You know, I don't really know. I didn't want to go too deep into them because I've just really, there's not a lot of information about it. There's just some allegations,
Yeah.
and he was expelled for some of the stuff with the young boys. I don't know. So I didn't want to go too deep into it, but yeah, it was a very, you know, very political time, and people, you know, I just can't imagine those days in India as colonial rules breaking down, and you know, the Theosophical Society is quite a powerful institution in India. Like it really was, and her alignment with Gandhi, and you know, there was a lot going on. I think there was a lot going on, and who knows really what happened. We'll never know. Like, I mean, we just have little snippets of information about Leadbeater, and people loved him or hated him, so I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, well, whenever somebody brings up these controversial
Yep.
allegations against anybody in the
Yep.
society or anywhere else, I say, what you do is you find out about the person, you get
Yeah.
your own truths, you read what they read, and you see what resonates with you. And once you've read Leadbeater, and once you've listened to Krishnamurti, you form your own opinion and your own ideas and your own beliefs. And you know, and that's the crux of it, is that you don't believe some allegation just because somebody says it. You just go find out for yourself.
Yeah, completely. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, that was great. I had a good time.
I had a discussion with a colleague, and he say, because he did research on many theosophists, and he say, like, for Leadbeater, for Krishnamurti, for Annie Besant, even for Madame Blavatsky, there have been allegations of different things. And we don't know if it's true or not, but I think the important thing is what they teach.
Yes. Yes.
What they did, maybe they did it and it was wrong. I don't know. Maybe they did not do it at all. It's just gossiping. But one thing is sure, when you have the first goal of like create a nucleus of brotherhood, I don't know what the personal life of the person who brought that. Maybe, I don't know if it was a good person or not, but the message is certainly fantastic and applicable, like all over the world.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you out of time, Reed?
I got a few more minutes. Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, the one thing is sure is I want to thank you very much for that presentation. Like, it was very good, very instructive, very interesting.
Thank you.
And like, it also brought a lot of question and commentary and stuff like that. So thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed it. It was I enjoy these kind of deep dives into different characters. It's nice. You know, we talk a lot about, you know, the abstract and the karma and the intuition and rebirth and these type of things, but sometimes it's a little biography or a biopic is a nice detour, you know, to see, to tie in a little history and see how some of this stuff played out. I learned a lot actually just doing this, about the history and you know, Krishnamurti, and what kind of an impact he really had. And you know, another presentation I gave at Lux kind of focused a lot on California and what really happened there. It really is a mystical part of the world, and Ojai, and you know, a lot of things happened in California and continue to, from a new age occult kind of esoteric standpoint, and the whole state, you know, from Ojai in the south to Esalen up in the north, and everything, you know, even Aleister Crowley was there, Scientology, like it's all, you know, there's something in the water in California, and it's pretty fascinating. It's a fascinating place, and it's, you know, people who are benevolent and people who are not benevolent, but they're all kind of, you know, in California. And I find that aspect really interesting. And, you know, with the Theosophical Society has been in California since, well, probably the turn of the century, the last century. Yeah, you know, so moving from Hollywood to Ojai, it's really interesting place. And I found it quite fascinating that like 100 years ago, you know, Krishnamurti put down roots there. Like he knew something was going on in that valley, right? And yeah, I find that stuff really fascinating. And you know, some of that ties into a book I read about the coming of the sixth race by Leadbeater, actually, where he said, you know, California makes the westernmost tip of North America, but in the cataclysms at the end of this round, California will make the easternmost tip of the new,
Right.
you know, so
The new continent.
California is going nowhere. And why is that? You know, it's an interesting, it's an interesting place. And that, you know, is a whole other narrative to all of this spiritual and theosophical history is the role of California in much of this.